How can the Baltimore Ravens final 53-man roster stack up with the rest of the NFL? We talk about that and so much more come up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens. We're your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast here. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making us your first listen each and every day on Locked On Ravens. Are free and available all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We are a 5-day-a-week Ravens podcast, as I mentioned there at the top of the show, and that means 5 days per week we bring you Ravens content, Ravens analysis, Ravens news. Of course, we got a big news day today as the Ravens will have to cut down from 90. Well, they already made a couple of moves on Monday, but from where they are now to 53 players, about 20 plus moves to go for the Ravens by 4 p.m. And we will be doing a live stream today at about, could be 4:30, could be 5, could be 6, right after the actual roster cuts are announced, the Ravens 53-man roster is announced. We'll get into all of that here today on the channel. But for now, I want to talk about how can this Ravens team, how can this roster stack up with the rest of the NFL? Obviously, at the time of this recording, I don't know what the Ravens roster is going to look like 100%, but I can get a pretty good idea about it. And so yesterday's episode, I did my final 53-man roster predictions. I'll read them off again here, but if you want more analysis on what I think is going to happen for the Ravens, you can check out that show. But I more so want to talk about the top tier guys. How can the Ravens roster with the top tier guys, but also the depth that they're going to have to keep, how can that stack up with some of the teams like the Chiefs and the Eagles and the Bengals and the Bills and some of those other NFL contenders? Then I want to talk a bit more about the practice squad, which we also talked about on yesterday's show, and just how Baltimore can maybe assemble the best practice squad in the NFL and why it could be only using their guys. So we'll talk about that in the second part. Then we'll take a look at the Ravens moves that they made over the course of Monday, who they released, and that will kind of flow into the second segment too. So I'm doing a little Maryland repping here with I got a crab shirt on, Maryland flag crab shirt. You got to have your Maryland flag gear if you're from Maryland, especially, repping the state. So I do have that here today. It's a nice little Maryland touch, but let's get into the Ravens and how their roster can stack up with the rest of the league. Now, again, we don't know the depth pieces that are going to make this team, at least kind of the lower level guys. Now, there have been reports and rumors that Keaton Mitchell is going to make the final 53-man roster. That was on my episode yesterday, where I said that I have him on my roster. That'd be really good. But Keaton Mitchell is not going to have the same impact as J.K. Dobbins, as an Odell Beckham, as a Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, right? I think when you're talking about how a roster can stack up with the rest of the league, I don't necessarily have to know what the 49th man, 50th man, all those guys are important, but the guys who are going to have the biggest impact of the season are obviously your best players. So with the Ravens, Lamar Jackson is 100% the Ravens' best player. There's no doubt about that. I'd be very intrigued to hear if anybody had an argument for somebody else. I know there is value in a guy like Ronnie Stanley, Marlon Humphrey, Justin Tucker, Roquan Smith, etc. But Lamar to me is by far and away, he's the guy that makes the gears turn. I think if you're talking about, and I've said this before, if you're talking about a most valuable player, I think Lamar Jackson is the most valuable player in the NFL by definition of the term most valuable player. You can talk about Patrick Mahomes, you can talk about Joe Burrow, all those guys, Jalen Hurts, all those guys, Josh Allen. But to me, I think if you take those guys off of their teams, yeah, the Chiefs would be worse without Mahomes. The Bengals would be worse without Burrow, right? Those guys are all really good. But Lamar, if you take him off the Ravens, as we've seen over the course of these couple of seasons here, the Ravens' floor just gets demolished. Their ceiling gets demolished, I think, to a bigger extent than some of those other quarterbacks. And that's a testament to how good Lamar is, how good Mahomes is, all those guys. I'm not trying to start a fight about who's better or who's not. But to me, I think Lamar is the most valuable player in the league. So to me, in terms of the actual definition, not by, his play in 2022 or even his play in 2019, that's where I'm at. So you got to surround that guy with talent. I think the Ravens have done that really well this offseason with Odell Beckham, with Zay Flowers, bringing in those guys. You bring back Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, the running game with J.K. Dobbins. But it's not just the starter guys, right? You also have the depth in Gus Edwards, Isaiah Likely, Nelson Aguilar, the offensive line from 1 through 5, Ronnie Stanley, John Simpson, Tyler Linderbaum, Kevin Zeitler, and Morgan Moses. The Ravens offense, to me, on paper, is one of the best offensive units they've had in their team history. And that's saying a lot because they've had some pretty good offenses, such as the 2019 team. But on paper, star power, etc., I think this Ravens team is one of the best offenses we've seen. Well, this Ravens offense is one of the best offenses we've seen. Whereas you look at some of the other teams around the league, I think the Bengals have a high-powered offense. Obviously, the Chiefs do. They won the Super Bowl last year. I think those teams are in the conversation. Philadelphia, obviously, they have a lot of weapons over there. The Bills are a really weird team, but I think still with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, they can be competitive, and they obviously will be again this season. But I really like Baltimore's roster, Baltimore's offense on paper. And even when you get into those guys who, who's going to make the roster? Is Keaton Mitchell going to make the roster? Seems like it's going to be that way. He's a guy that can maybe have some value here and there. A guy like Tylan Wallace can have some value here and there. But the big guns, Lamar Jackson, all those guys, they're going to make this thing go for Baltimore. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, I think there are a couple of more questions. I think when you're talking about the dominant defenses of the league, Baltimore is certainly up there, but I think a lot of guys have to step up to truly get them to where they want to be there. Rafael Owe has to step up. David Ajabo has to step up. Guys in the cornerback room, what can a guy like Fardarius Washington has to start at slot corner for them this season? Can he step up in a huge role for them? Jalen Armour-Davis, Pepe Williams, inside linebacker-wise, can Patrick Queen continue to build on what was a really good season for him? On the defensive line, Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, Travis Jones without Calais Campbell there. How's that going to work out? So on the offensive side of the ball, I think there is a higher floor for them. The defenses we saw throughout the preseason, I do want to make it clear, we did not see the starters. The starters were not out there. There was no Roquan Smith, no Marlon Humphrey, none of those guys. But I think on the defensive side of the ball, with how they ended last season, Baltimore's roster is right there with some of these teams that people call contenders, but the Ravens are in that contender category too. The big four in the AFC, in my opinion, no particular order, is Kansas City, Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Buffalo. Those are my four teams that I think are like the true contender one status. I think the Chiefs are probably in their own category right now. I think you can kind of crown them as, the AFC leaders. Obviously, the Bengals have won the AFC North 2 years in a row. You got to give them their respect too. But I think that Baltimore and Buffalo, I think Cincinnati, Buffalo, and Baltimore are in the same category as like tier 2 teams. The Chiefs, we can say, are a tier 1 team. That I'm fine with saying that. But those four are the tier 1 and tier 2 teams in the AFC. In the NFC, the Eagles, I think, are by far and away that top tier team in the NFC. Then you have teams like San Francisco, in Dallas, and maybe I think those two. Seattle's a tier 3 team to me, but I don't really know who in this league, if you're talking about if the Ravens can hit on all cylinders, if everything goes right, and that usually doesn't go that way. It'd be great if it did, but it usually doesn't. But if the Ravens can hit, let's just say on most cylinders, I think with the talent they have on defense, it's not just, everybody has to step up on the defense. They have everybody who's unproven. We know what Roquan Smith can do. We know what Patrick Queen can do. But again, he's kind of in the middle of a step-up guy and we know what Marlon Humphrey can do. We know what Marcus Williams can do. How can Kyle Hamilton build? And then special teams-wise, we know what Justin Tucker can do, don't we? So, Justin Tucker can flip a game. Justin Tucker, I think, adds like a win a year for the Ravens, maybe even more than that. He is that valuable of a player. So when you're talking about, who has the best roster in the NFL, I think that requires a bit of a deeper dive than I've done here. And that wasn't the point of this segment. I just wanted to kind of talk about, when you're talking about the top contenders in the league and who you picture as that, I don't think teams like the Chargers or the Broncos or the Raiders or the Jets or the Dolphins or the Patriots, the Browns, the Steelers, they're not in that category to me. They can certainly get there, but we're talking about, pre-regular season rankings to me at least. I think that it's Kansas City, it's Philadelphia, it's kind of the, two guys that made it to the Super Bowl, 2 teams that did. You got to respect that. But then the Cincinnatis, the Baltimores, the Buffaloes, the San Frans, the Dallases, those teams can all make noise. Baltimore is right up in that conversation. I think Baltimore will 100% be a Super Bowl contender this year. But the key thing, the one key factor, and I've talked about it so much here, is health. If you're in every day, you've heard me talk about health. if Lamar can't stay healthy for the third straight season, if JK goes out with another injury, if Odell and Rashad Bateman can't play. Hopefully all that doesn't happen, right? Knock on wood. But I do think that health is going to be a key factor in determining which team can make the Super Bowl and win it, because we see that every single year where a team that looks super good on paper, they hit their stride early in the season, it just collapses because injuries happen. We've seen that firsthand with the Ravens over the past couple of seasons a little bit. So hopefully it can all work out for them. But in terms of on paper roster, and again, this time of this recording, we don't know the full 53 for Baltimore. But with that being said, the top guys, the Ravens are right there for sure. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about if the Ravens can maybe establish the best practice squad in the NFL this season. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Gametime. And there are plenty of times when people can get super stressed out trying to buy tickets, whether you're trying to find them last minute, if you're hunting down the best price, or competing with other buyers for a popular event. Buying tickets to your favorite event should not be that stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. And the Gametime app is great, especially for upcoming events in your area and obviously in the Baltimore area. They'll be playing the Houston Texans in week 1 of the regular season. So if you want to find tickets to that, be sure to check it out over at the Gametime app, because they have flash deals and last minute tickets. Easy to find. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. They have images of seat views so you can see where you're sitting before you buy those tickets. And plus, they have a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. Gametime is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price if you find tickets in the same section or row for less. Gametime will credit you 110% of that difference. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, and create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Cut Down Day, Tuesday. Kevin Ostraker still here with you. And again, 4 p.m. Eastern time is that deadline for the Ravens to get to 53 players. Will be going live a little bit after that, doing an instant reaction breakdown on YouTube. So if you're listening in audio form today, I appreciate you checking us out in audio form. But if you want to head over there live, you can subscribe on YouTube, turn notifications on. You can engage it. The chat's really fun to engage in, because I'm able during that live stream to everybody can put their reactions in there. I can respond to those. It's a really good conversation. But if you missed that and you want to either watch it back on YouTube or listen to it in audio form, I put it out in audio form after the fact. You can do that as well. But if you want an instant reaction, if you're here after the 4 p.m. deadline, you can go and check out the live stream, whether it is currently live and I'm live streaming, or if it's already done and I put it up either in video or audio form as a replay. But let's move away from the actual roster for a segment and talk about the Ravens practice squad. Now, we did talk about this a bit yesterday, and if you want more of an in-depth analysis on players that I think could make the practice squad, be sure to check out yesterday's episode, the Monday episode. But I want to talk about if the Ravens can make the best practice squad in the NFL and if it could really become one of the best just based off of their own guys. Like, I know different teams approach it different ways, right? Where I think some teams, they don't really, the cuts that they have either get claimed off waivers or they don't like them enough to put in the practice squad. So they kind of go hunting and get guys from other teams. Baltimore, on the other hand, I think usually, not all the time, but usually builds out their practice squad with most of their guys that they've had in camp in the preseason. And then over the course of the season, maybe they'll make a couple of additions, a couple of cuts, but it's all kind of in the practice squad doesn't necessarily get fully formed until a couple days after cut down day. In some cases, some teams are really fast, other teams are not. But for the Ravens, they have a lot of guys on their roster right now that I think a lot of teams would like to have. And that it's obviously subject to who gets claimed on waivers and who doesn't. Now, my final 53-man roster, I'll just read it down really quickly. So just for reference, if you missed it on yesterday's show, I still recommend you check out that show, though. But 3 quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, Josh Johnson. 4 running backs, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell. 1 fullback, Patrick Ricard. 6 wide receivers, Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, Devin Duvernay, Nelson Aguilar, Tylen Wallace. 3 tight ends, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler. 8 offensive linemen, Ronnie Stanley, Tyler Linderbaum, Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses, John Simpson, Daniel Falele, Patrick McCary, and Salah. 5 defensive linemen, just Matabike, Broderick Washington, Michael Pierce, Travis Jones, Brent Urban. 4 outside linebackers, Adafe Owe, David Ajabo, Tavius Robinson, Jadeveon Clowney. Tyus Bowser is on the NFI list right now. Inside linebackers, 4. Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen, Trenton Simpson, Malik Harrison. Corners, I have 8 of them. Marlon Humphrey, Rock Yassin, Ronald Darby, Caillou Kelly, Jalen Armour Davis, Pippin Williams, Ladarius Washington, Kevon Seymour. Safeties, I have 4. Marcus Williams, Kyle Hamilton, Geno Stone, Brandon Stevens. Special teams, I have 3. Justin Tucker, Jordan Stout, Tyler Ott. Whew, that was all right. That was a breathful, but it wasn't only one breath, but got everything out. So the guys that I didn't have on that roster, some notable names: Anthony Brown was a guy that was not on there. Melvin Gordon, Ben Mason, James Prochet, Laquan Treadwell, Dante Demas, Travis Vokalek, Ben Cleveland, Angelo Blackson, Rayshad Nichols, Delshon Phillips, Kristen Welch, Daryl Worley, a couple of other guys in there too. But those are some of the names that I think could be back with the Ravens on the practice squad. But it also comes down to how many players in these positions the Ravens would want to keep. Like, for example, for the wide receiver position, this is assuming Tylan Wallace is the 6th wide receiver. I've said it multiple times. If you're an everyday, you listen to me every day, I've said it. James Prochet, to me, while he didn't do enough to make the team, in my opinion, he was somebody that I kind of had, once I figured Tylan Wallace was going to be the guy, I said, you know what, James Prochet is a practice squad like wide receiver 7. That's pretty fine. Like, I'm fine with that totally. So James Prochet is a practice squad guy. Yeah. Laquan Treadwell, it seems like Baltimore really likes him. He scored the touchdown on that amazing 4-play, 80-yard drive from Josh Johnson, which was great for him. I think Treadwell actually, he and Dante Demas have that 6'4", like that super tall contested catch skill set. That's what the Ravens don't have in their wide receiver room. As I've said before, Odo Beckham, Rashad Bateman, Zay Flower, they can go up and get a ball, but they're not 6'4" guys. Obviously, Mark Andrews is a big body target, Isaiah Likely is, but I think you want to have something like that on your team, whether it's the active roster or the practice squad. And for Baltimore, I think Laquan Treadwell could be that guy. I'm totally cool with Dante Demas being there too. One of the spoilers for the final segment is Baltimore moved on from Dante Demas yesterday on Monday. But I think it's a practice squad player. I think, again, Prochet and Treadwell will get first dibs on those practice squad spots. But we also have to keep in mind, too, that like maybe James Prochet wants to go, like the Ben Mason thing that happened a couple years ago, which John Harbaugh was mad. Oh, if you remember, John Harbaugh was asked about Ben Mason, and he said, well, that's only Ben can answer that. He was really, really upset. Ben Mason chose the Patriots practice squad over the Ravens practice squad. James Prochet might, if he gets offered for the Ravens practice squad and another team's practice squad, and he thinks, you know what, my time in Baltimore, it hasn't been what I anticipated. I just want a fresh start. The player has the right to do that if the team cuts him. Like, totally, it's up to the player where they want to go at that point. So I think Prochet and Treadwell would have dibs, but I think Demas would be cool too. But even Sean Ryan is a player that obviously had that really tough drop in the Tampa game. I still think, though, he's a guy that maybe the Ravens want to keep around. But do you keep 3? Do you keep 4? Do you keep 2 wide receivers? I don't know. Travis Vokalek is someone that if he's not claimed on waivers, that's a guy that I'm putting on. That's my first move on the Ravens, is getting Travis Vokalek back on the practice squad. I know some people are worried about him if he does get cut, about him not making it to the Ravens off of waivers, and I definitely share that. But we've seen guys, again, remember last year when Ardarius Washington and Anthony Brown got cut, and everybody was saying, well, they're gone, goodbye. And then they both made it through waivers, and Baltimore stacked them on the practice squad. And obviously, I don't think it worked out as well for Anthony Brown as it did Ardarius Washington this year. But they were still able to get, I think, 2 guys that not a lot of Ravens fans, not a lot of maybe people in the organization thought would pass through waivers. And, maybe the organization just knew something that everybody else didn't, but they were able to get those guys back. So it could be the same for a guy like Vokalek, could be Keaton Mitchell. I think he's on the roster. Like, I really do. If you're listening to this after 4 p.m., but I don't know right now. So I'm kind of speaking as if I don't know the future, because I don't. But Keaton Mitchell's a guy that I do not think would make it through waivers. Ardarius Washington, I do not think would make it through this year. I think Vokalek is an interesting one, because how many teams really want to use a waiver claim on a third string tight end effectively? I mean, he's balled out in training camp in the preseason. But with that already, with those guys I listed off, I think Baltimore can be and can have one of the best practice squads in the NFL this year. And that's actually really big, because you have the ability, obviously, to call up guys now and they can make an impact on the game. And with Baltimore, obviously injury situations can also be big. We've seen that for them over the past few seasons. So I think it's really important for Baltimore to have a good practice squad, and I think that they definitely can have one this year. And I'm excited to see how it all shapes up for them in that regard. Coming up, though, in our last part of the show, we'll talk about the Ravens' moves they already made yesterday and what could be coming on Tuesday here today. So be sure to stay tuned. Lots to get to on Locked On Ravens. We're back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens Tuesday edition. Taco Tuesday here. Actually, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you again. I really appreciate everybody who's tuning in and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. And whether you're listening in video form and audio form, it's the same show. So if you want to watch one day in video form, we got the live fish going in the background. Edgar Allan and Poe in there is the three fish. And then if maybe you want to listen in audio form one day, if you're driving to work, I appreciate both our video and audio listeners here. And again, we'll be live streaming it right around maybe 4, 5, 6 p.m. Eastern tonight once the roster becomes official, being an instant reaction episode there. And then obviously we will have our regular Wednesday episode coming up, and we'll break that roster down even more. But let's get into the Ravens moves. They actually made some. We kind of see some teams do it and some teams don't do it, where they'll release a couple of guys and then they'll make all the other cuts. And how it works this year is there's only really one cut down day where there isn't a pure deadline, or there weren't like 4 or 3 hard deadlines to get down to 75 and 85. The Ravens, it's for every team, 90 to 53 in one day, essentially. That's the deadline, and obviously that's today. But the Ravens did make 7 moves ahead of the deadline here, and that gets them down. They needed to release 37 players. Well, 37. They had, I think, 1 roster spot open, and they released 7 guys. So they're now down to 29 moves that they have to make. That's still a lot. But the Ravens, they waived 1 guy as a vested veteran in defensive back DeAndre Houston-Carson, and then cut 7 undrafted rookies: Trey Botts, Kai Caesar, Dante Demas, Jake Guidon, Corey Mayfield Jr., and Keely Sanders. So I think that, for me, a couple of those guys could come back on the practice squad. I think Guidon played actually pretty well in the preseason and could be good practice squad depth for them, at least in the last game I saw. I think I saw some flashes from him. I think Demas is another guy, too, that could be a really solid option for them. Now, the guys that get cut now, I think there's a less chance that they make the practice squad as opposed to maybe guys that get cut tomorrow. I don't think there's too big of, I don't expect Corey Mayfield Jr., I don't expect him on the practice squad. Sanders, I could see potentially. Trey Botts, Kai Caesar. I think the Ravens would probably keep Rashad Nichols over one of those guys, but who knows? Maybe Trey Botts had a good game in the Tampa game. He had a sack, so maybe they end up keeping him. DeAndre Houston-Carson is a really interesting one, though, because then this is a conversation I wanted to have about what the handshake deal situation would be like with the Ravens, because there are going to be a couple of those. I think for most teams, the Ravens are a team that have used that over the course of their franchise history, especially recently, and for good reason. DeAndre Houston-Carson came in a couple of weeks ago and was a special team standout for the Chicago Bears, and has that corner, like the slot corner safety versatility that I think a lot of teams would value. And plus the fact that he has a special team standout. Obviously, the Ravens had another Chicago Bears special team standout about a decade ago in Corey Graham, and he's now a Ravens Super Bowl champion. And the thing with Corey Graham, if you remember, if you were in tune with the Ravens at that time, was that Corey Graham came into the Ravens and the Ravens signed him. They were making those special teams only moves where they only sign guys sometimes for their special teams ability. Brendan Amendejo is one of those guys where I think, and obviously he also was a Chicago Bears special team standout before he came to Baltimore. But for Amendejo, it was, he's an inside linebacker, but he's going to be a special teams guy for us, and that's what it is. Played some inside linebacker snaps, right? Like, for sure. But he was the guy that was mainly a special teams player. Corey Graham for them came in, and he's a corner, but he's mostly a special teams guy. But he played corner for them and was actually a very serviceable corner for them for a couple of seasons. And so do the Ravens value that? I know the comparison for some people was Anthony Levine Sr., is DeAndre Houston-Carson's comparison. Maybe that's it. Maybe they want to bring him back on a handshake deal, because I think what we're going to see is potentially Keaton Mitchell go to IR. I don't know. I'm naming guys that could go. I'm not saying they will. Keaton Mitchell could go depending on that injury and what the Ravens want to do with him this season. I'm pretty sure Pepe Williams will go to IR. And then I wouldn't anticipate them putting Marlon there unless they obviously don't feel like he'll be ready by week 4. I would not anticipate that happening. But other than that, if Pepe goes to IR, I think they could maybe bring back a guy like DeAndre Houston Carson, or a guy that I forgot to mention in the second part of the show, Daryl Worley, who on our episode yesterday I talked about. I think he's going to be a handshake deal player for the Ravens, and it could just work out where they want him back because of, they've tried him at safety, and I think they're trying to use him there, but he can obviously play corner, which he did for multiple teams, including the Ravens. But I think they're going to be a couple of handshake deals. Maybe Brent Urban is one of those handshake deal guys where the Ravens only keep 4 interior defensive linemen with the ability to keep another inside linebacker, another offensive lineman, another corner, and another running back like Keaton Mitchell, maybe Travis Vokalek, another tight end. So maybe Brent Urban, because I don't think, with him being a veteran and everything, I think they could just agree to a deal with him and say, hey, we're going to bring you back tomorrow. And that's going to be that. I think if Brent Urban gets cut, it wouldn't totally shock me. But if that is the case, I would expect him back, obviously, very soon in a Ravens uniform. There aren't a ton of guys you can do that with, I think, this year for the Ravens. Obviously, a vested veteran. I think that's 4 years in the NFL that you can do that and be a vested veteran and not have to pass through waivers. But it is interesting because this is the roster manipulation game you have to play, because on top of everything, we're going to see cuts today. And again, if you're listening to this after 4 p.m. and the rosters are announced, there will be players that get cut that we're all going to be like, oh, wow, this guy got cut? Like, really? And maybe it's a corner. Maybe it's an edge guy. I mean, edge isn't necessarily a need anymore because of Jadeveon Clowney. At least I don't think they can add. Also, I keep forgetting, guys, another guy I forgot to mention for the practice squad, Malik Ham. Malik Ham's a guy, local. I think he showed out in the preseason for the most part. Practice squad, I think, could be in play for Malik Ham too. But I think for the Ravens, if they really like a guy that gets cut, they might have to find a way to create another roster spot. And part of that is either figuring out if they need to release one of these other guys, if just to bring in another player. It'd be a tough way because I think the Ravens are already kind of up against it in terms of how many good players they can actually get rid of here. But obviously, if this player that gets, like if it's a corner, are you sacrificing, I guess, Ardarius Washington in this case, or Kevon Seymour? I think Kevon Seymour in my roster would be the more realistic one. Are you sacrificing Kevon Seymour and then trying to bring him back on the practice squad for a better corner player? I mean, my answer to that is yes. But the whole roster manipulation thing is one of the more intriguing parts of this entire thing, because we're going to see all these handshake deals happen, and we'll see a couple of veterans released where, not on the Ravens, who will say, yeah, that guy's going back to whoever's team it is. So it's exciting. I think, again, it's a day that I think we have to be mindful of too. It's very stressful for a lot of players, stressful for the organizations as well. It's not a fun thing. Obviously, it's part of the business, but for some guys, their NFL dreams will end today. And I have to feel for that and feel for them, and obviously wish everybody today, all the NFL players, the best of luck and the best in what's next for them, whether it is in the NFL, practice squad, whatnot. Also, one more guy, Jeremy Lucien. I keep forgetting, guys. Keep doing it. But Jeremy Lucien's another guy, that safety corner versatility, I think could also make some noise on the practice squad if he makes it there for the Ravens. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Be sure to check out our live stream later today. Maybe it's going to be 4:30, maybe 5, maybe 6. We'll go live or after the roster gets announced for the Ravens, live on YouTube. Be sure to like this video. Also, subscribe on YouTube and turn notifications on so you don't miss the notifications. We will be going live. And then also, of course, we'll be back here tomorrow talking more about the Ravens roster and breaking it down. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here later today and tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.